Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm 37 now, and looking back, I realize I was pretty naive about friendships. Being autistic, I've always had trouble reading social situations and picking up on subtle cues. I tend to take people at face value, which usually works out fine, but sometimes it means I miss red flags that neurotypical people might catch right away. A few years ago, I had what I thought was a close friend. We met through mutual acquaintances at a community event and seemed to click immediately. She was outgoing where I was reserved, talkative where I preferred listening. At first, I appreciated how she could carry conversations and make social situations easier for me. She was passionate about wanting children. She talked constantly about her plans to have kids and even adopt additional ones. I thought it was sweet how much she wanted to be a mother. What I didn't realize was how much my own choice bothered her. See, I've never wanted children. It's not something I came to lightly. I have good reasons. I have severe anxiety disorder and some genetic conditions that could be passed down. I also went through some traumatic experiences as a child that left me with nightmares and panic attacks. The idea of being responsible for another person's well-being when I can barely manage my own mental health feels overwhelming and unfair to any potential child. But she couldn't accept that. Every few months, she'd bring up the topic again. She would tell me I'd make a great mother and that I was just scared like everyone else at first. I would explain that I genuinely didn't want kids and had thought about it carefully. She would insist I change my mind when I met the right guy. I would remind her that my partner and I both agreed we didn't want children. Then she would say it was weird that I didn't want kids and that there must be something wrong with me. These conversations happened over and over. I started dreading them, but I figured she meant well. Maybe she was just trying to help me see possibilities I was missing. My autistic brain sometimes misreads situations, so I assumed I was being too sensitive. After about 3 years of this pattern, I was getting really tired of defending my personal choices. But the breaking point came at our mutual friend's wedding. It was a beautiful ceremony. Our friend looked radiant, and everyone was in such a celebratory mood. During the reception dinner, we were seated at a large round table with my partner, some mutual friends, and several people we'd never met before. The speeches were starting, and everyone was trying to listen respectfully. That's when she decided to start up again. From directly across the table, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear, she asked if my partner and I had thought any more about having kids. I tried to redirect her by saying we were at a wedding and should focus on celebrating our friends. She kept going, telling me I wasn't getting any younger, and my biological clock was ticking. I asked her to please not do this here because people were trying to listen to the speeches. She said she didn't understand why I was so against it, and that kids would give my life meaning. The strangers at our table were starting to look uncomfortable. My partner reached over and squeezed my hand, knowing how much these conversations upset me. I was getting angry but trying to keep it together out of respect for the bride and groom. I explained again that I'd told her my reasons many times and asked her to please change the subject. She called me selfish and said children are a blessing. I told her that my personal reproductive choices weren't selfish and weren't up for debate. She got this horrible smirk on her face like she was about to deliver some kind of winning argument. Then she said the thing that made me realize she was never really my friend at all. She told me she hoped I got pregnant. The words hung in the air. I felt like I'd been slapped. She knew exactly how I felt about having children. She knew about my mental health struggles and my genetic concerns. She knew I'd have to make an impossible choice if I ever got pregnant, and she was wishing that on me. Something clicked in that moment. This wasn't a friend trying to help me see a different perspective. This was someone who wanted to force her values on me, no matter what happened to me. So I responded loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear. I asked her why she would wish I'd have to get an abortion and told her that was so messed up to wish on someone. Her face went bright red. The entire table went silent. People at neighboring tables turned to look. She sat there for a minute, mouth opening and closing like a fish, before getting up and walking away from the table. She didn't come back until after dinner was served, so her plate was stone cold by the time she returned. When she sat down, she leaned across the table and angrily asked me how I could say that and told me I made her look terrible in front of everyone. I asked her what she expected when she wished pregnancy on someone who told her repeatedly they didn't want children. She claimed that wasn't what she meant. I asked her what she did mean then. I reminded her that she knew about my anxiety disorder, my genetic conditions, and my traumatic experiences that affect my mental health. I told her that either she was wishing for me to have a child who might inherit these problems and suffer, or she was wishing for me to go through the trauma of terminating a pregnancy. I asked her which one it was. She didn't have an answer for that. She just sat there getting redder and redder. I told her that for 3 years I'd tried to be patient with these conversations and had explained my reasons over and over. I said I thought she was my friend, but friends don't wish unwanted pregnancies on each other. Friends respect each other's choices about their own bodies and lives. The rest of the table was dead quiet. Even the strangers looked uncomfortable with how she'd behaved. She finished her cold dinner in silence and barely spoke to anyone for the rest of the evening. A few weeks later, I found out through mutual friends that she'd been complaining about me being dramatic over a breast cancer scare I'd had. Because she gets benign cysts, she felt my concerns about a suspicious lump were overblown and attention-seeking. That was the final nail in the coffin of our friendship. I'm a single mom raising my 15-year-old daughter. We live in a decent neighborhood now, but I grew up in a rough area where disrespectful behavior was just part of daily life. I worked my butt off to get us out of that environment because I wanted better for my kid. I put in extra hours at work, saved every penny, and made sacrifices so we could move somewhere safer with better schools. This summer, I enrolled my daughter in soccer camp twice a week. She's always been athletic, and I thought it would be good for her to stay active and maybe make some new friends. The camp is right next to a shopping plaza, which is convenient because the kids are allowed to grab food from the fast food places during their break. Everything was going well until my daughter started hanging out with 2 new girls from the camp. When they came over to our house for the first time, I knew immediately that I didn't like them. They were loud from the moment they walked in, talking over each other and practically shouting. I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they were just excited. But it got worse. They started blasting music without asking, made themselves completely at home by raiding my fridge, and left trash everywhere. When I politely asked them to turn the music down because I had a work call to take, one of them actually rolled her eyes at me and started arguing. She questioned why they had to turn it down and said they weren't even being that loud. When I explained that I just needed them to lower the volume for about 30 minutes while I handled some business, the other girl called it stupid and asked why I couldn't just go to another room. I had to remind them that this was my house and I was asking them nicely to respect that. They reluctantly turned it down but complained about me the whole time. The final straw was when I noticed $40 missing from my kitchen counter after they left. I had left the money there to pay for pizza delivery later, and it was just gone. I told my daughter that her friends weren't welcome in our home anymore. She wasn't happy about it, but she accepted it and continued seeing them at soccer camp. A few weeks later, I got a call that changed everything. The coach called me while I was at work and told me she needed to talk about what happened at the plaza with my daughter and her friends. When I asked what happened and if my daughter was okay, she said my daughter was fine, but there had been an incident at the restaurant. She explained that she actually had it recorded on her phone because she happened to be nearby when it started. The coach explained that my daughter and her 2 friends had gone to the local sandwich shop during their break. According to what she witnessed and recorded, the 2 friends started heckling the worker behind the counter. They complained that service was taking forever and called the worker stupid. When the poor employee apologized and explained that he was moving fast because they were short-staffed, one of the girls told him maybe he should get a real job if he couldn't handle this one. The situation escalated from there. They started throwing napkins at the worker, dumped their drinks all over the floor intentionally, and when the manager came out, they flipped him off and ran out laughing. My daughter was recording the whole thing on her phone, laughing along with them. When the coach showed me the video later, I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't the daughter I raised. She was just standing there, filming these girls humiliate someone who was just trying to do their job. That night, I sat my daughter down for a serious conversation. I told her we needed to talk about what happened that day. She brushed it off, saying it wasn't even that bad and they were just messing around. I asked her if she really thought humiliating someone at their job was just messing around, and she accused me of being dramatic. I told her I was pulling her out of soccer camp and she wasn't seeing those friends anymore. She exploded at that news, yelling that I couldn't do that and that I was ruining her life. I explained that her behavior that day had ruined any trust I had in her judgment. She then accused me of not liking her friends just because they were from the hood, claiming I thought I was better than everyone now. I told her she was right. I didn't like them because they were too loud, too rude, too disrespectful, and clearly a bad influence on her. She called me classist, but I told her to call it whatever she wanted because I wouldn't let her turn into someone who thinks it's okay to treat people like garbage. She walked off to her room and hasn't spoken to me since. That was 3 days ago. I called my sister to vent, thinking she'd understand where I was coming from. Instead, she completely blindsided me. She told me I needed to let this go and let my daughter see her friends. When I reminded her about everything I had just told her, the stealing and the humiliation of service workers, she said I was forgetting where I came from and acting like I was too good for people from the neighborhood. I tried to explain that this had nothing to do with where they were from, but everything to do with how they acted. She insisted I was being judgmental and that these girls probably didn't have the advantages my daughter had. I pointed out that wasn't an excuse to be cruel to people. But my sister kept pushing, saying I was putting on airs and should remember my roots. She made me feel like maybe I was overreacting. Here's the thing though, I do remember my roots. I remember exactly what that environment was like, and that's precisely why I worked so hard to get us out of it. I remember the fights, the disrespect, the way people treated each other like they didn't matter. I didn't want that for my daughter. The next day, I got a call from the manager of the sandwich shop. He asked if I was the mother of the girl who was with those 2 kids yesterday. I confirmed and immediately apologized for what had happened. But then he surprised me by explaining that he was actually calling because my daughter had come back by herself that day. She had apologized for what happened and cleaned up the mess her friends made. She had even brought money to pay for the drinks they wasted and spent about an hour there making things right. She had also asked if she could talk to the worker they were rude to so she could apologize directly. When my daughter got home that evening, she knocked on my bedroom door and asked if we could talk. I told her, of course we could. She apologized for what had happened, admitting she was wrong to go along with it and wrong to argue with me about it. When I asked what made her change her mind, she explained that she kept thinking about what I had said about treating people like garbage. She said when she watched the video again, she realized that's exactly what they had done. That worker was just trying to do his job, and they had made his day worse for no reason. I told her I was proud of her for going back and making it right. I'm a single mom of 2 kids, ages 6 and 8. I usually pick up my kids around 3 p.m. and we head straight to the playground. It's become our routine and we've gotten to know most of the other parents and kids who frequent the area. It's usually a peaceful place where kids can be, kids and parents can chat while keeping an eye on their little ones. That Tuesday started like any other day. My kids ran ahead to claim their favorite swings while I found my usual spot on the bench next to a few other parents I've become friendly with over the months. There were about 8 kids playing that afternoon, ranging from probably 4 to 10 years old. Everything was normal until this woman showed up with her son. I'd seen them around the neighborhood before, but they rarely came to the playground. The kid looked to be around 7 or 8, and from the moment they arrived, trouble started brewing. The boy immediately ran to the swing set where my daughter and another little girl were already swinging. Instead of waiting his turn or asking nicely, he just shoved my daughter right off her swing. She hit the ground hard and started crying. I walked over and told the woman that her son had just pushed my daughter off the swing. The woman barely looked up from her phone and told me that kids will be kids and my daughter would get over it. I helped my daughter up and brushed the dirt off her knees. She had a small scrape, but was more shocked than hurt. I decided to let it slide, thinking maybe the kid just didn't know better. Over the next 20 minutes, this kid was like a tornado of destruction. He cut in line for the slide, pushing smaller kids out of the way. He threw sand from the sandbox at other children. When a 5-year-old boy was trying to cross the monkey bars, Karen's son literally grabbed his legs and made him fall. The other parents and I started exchanging worried looks. This wasn't normal playground behavior. This was deliberate bullying. Another parent approached the woman and politely asked if she could talk to her son about taking turns. The woman finally looked up, clearly irritated, and asked what the problem was now. The other parent explained that her son had been pushing and hitting the other kids, and they were getting scared to play. The woman responded by saying that maybe if these kids weren't so weak, her son wouldn't have to push past them. She claimed her son had every right to play there. Her son had just made 3 kids cry in the span of half an hour, and she was defending him. I tried to reason with her, saying we all wanted our kids to have fun, but there needed to be some basic rules about not hurting other children. The woman stood up and got in my face, telling me not to tell her how to raise her child. She said the playground areas were public space, and if I didn't like how her son played, maybe I should find somewhere else to go. That's when things escalated. Her son, emboldened by his mother's defense, walked over to the smallest kid on the playground, a 4-year-old girl, and pushed her so hard she fell backward and hit her head on the metal base of the slide. The little girl started screaming, and her mother rushed over. The injured child's mother had had enough and announced she was calling the homeowners association right away because this had gone too far. The entitled woman shouted back that she could call whoever she wanted because her son wasn't doing anything wrong. Within 15 minutes, a board member from the homeowners association showed up. His name was Mr. Thompson, and he was known for being fair but firm when it came to community rules. Mr. Thompson asked for an explanation of what was happening after receiving multiple complaints about aggressive behavior. All of us parents started talking at once, explaining the situation. Mr. Thompson listened patiently, then turned to the woman. He told her that she and her son needed to leave the playground immediately because this behavior violated community guidelines about safe play areas. The woman argued that he couldn't ban them because they lived there and paid homeowners association fees just like everyone else. Mr. Thompson said that the safety of all children came first and that they were banned from the playground effective immediately. He warned that if they continued to cause problems, further action would be taken. That's when the woman completely lost it. She started screaming about discrimination and unfair treatment, using language I won't repeat in front of children. Her son was crying now, probably more from his mother's outburst than anything else. The woman yelled that if they couldn't use the playground, then nobody could. She stormed off toward the parking area, dragging her sobbing son behind her. Mr. Thompson stayed to fill out an incident report while the rest of us tried to calm down our kids. The playground was just starting to return to normal when we heard an engine revving loudly. The woman had gotten in her car, a big black SUV, and was driving straight toward the playground. At first I thought maybe she was just leaving aggressively, but then she turned directly toward the swing set. I screamed for everyone to get back as parents grabbed their kids and ran. The woman's car crashed through the low decorative fence surrounding the playground. She drove straight into the swing set, completely destroying 2 swings and bending the metal frame. Then she reversed and drove into the slide structure, sending plastic pieces flying everywhere. Kids were screaming and crying. Parents were calling 911. Mr. Thompson was shouting at the woman to stop, but she wasn't done. She drove over the sandbox, crushing the wooden border and scattering sand everywhere, then plowed through the picnic table area. Finally, her car got stuck on a large concrete border stone and the engine started smoking. She tried to reverse but couldn't move. That's when she got out of the car, still screaming that now nobody got to play and asking how we liked that. Police sirens were already wailing in the distance. Someone had called 911 the moment she started driving toward the playground. The woman seemed to realize what she'd done because she suddenly got very quiet and tried to get back in her car, but it wouldn't start. The police arrived within minutes, followed by an ambulance to check on the children. Thankfully, no one was physically hurt, but several kids were traumatized by what they'd witnessed. The woman was arrested on the spot for reckless endangerment, destruction of property, and several other charges I can't remember. Her son was taken by his grandmother, who apparently had been trying to get custody for months due to the woman's unstable behavior. The playground was completely destroyed, thousands of dollars in damage, all because one entitled mother couldn't accept that her child's aggressive behavior had results. 3 months later, we found out the woman had been sentenced to 18 months in jail and had to pay full restitution for the playground repairs, plus damages for emotional trauma to the children. Back in the mid-90s, I was working at a manufacturing plant on the night shift. While other people called in sick every other week with hangovers or just because they didn't feel like coming in, I showed up. Rain or shine, tired or not, I was there. I worked my regular shift 4 nights a week, but I also picked up extra shifts whenever they needed coverage. The overtime pay was decent, and I was trying to save up for a car. My old beater was on its last legs, and I needed something reliable. So when people called out, which happened constantly, I was usually the first person management called. I genuinely rarely got sick. Maybe once or twice a year I'd catch a cold, but I'd still drag myself in unless I was really dying. I had perfect attendance for almost 2 years straight. Even when I didn't like some of my co-workers or supervisors, everyone acknowledged that I was a hard worker who showed up when I was supposed to. The night supervisor was this guy who thought he was hot stuff just because he had a tiny bit of authority. He was one of those people who loved having power over others, even though he was basically just a middle manager at a factory. He'd make people wait in his office for no reason, just to show he could. He'd write people up for being 2 minutes late but ignore it when his favorites rolled in 15 minutes after their shift started. So when I woke up that Tuesday evening feeling absolutely terrible, I knew calling in wasn't going to go over well. I had this stomach bug that hit me like a freight train. I'm talking about the kind of sickness where you're literally running to the bathroom every 5 minutes, losing everything from both ends. And nothing would stay down, not even water. I tried sipping some Gatorade earlier, but that came right back up along with some yogurt I'd attempted to eat. I felt weak, shaky, and completely drained. There was no way I could operate machinery or even stand for long periods in this condition, but I knew I had to at least try calling in. Even though I'd never done it before for something like this, I called the plant around 9 p.m., about an hour before my shift started. I told him I was really sick with some kind of stomach bug and didn't think I could make it in that night. He immediately asked what I meant by not being able to make it in. I explained that I had severe nausea and diarrhea, couldn't keep anything down, and was running to the bathroom constantly. He told me we were already short-staffed that night because one guy had called in earlier and another was on vacation. He said I had to come in, no exceptions. I tried to explain again that I understood they were short-staffed, but I was really sick and had been throwing up all day. He cut me off and said he didn't want to hear excuses. He claimed everyone gets a little stomach ache sometimes and told me to take some antacid and get down there. He gave me 15 minutes to get there or I'd be written up. I desperately tried to explain that I was losing it from both ends every 5 minutes and could barely stand up. He said that wasn't his problem. He went on about having quotas to meet and not being able to have people calling in just because they didn't feel perfect. He reminded me that I was one of their reliable workers and told me to act like it. After 3 years of perfect attendance and picking up everyone else's slack, he wouldn't give me one night off when I was genuinely ill. But I needed this job, and I knew he was petty enough to write me up or even try to fire me if I didn't show. So I told him fine, I'd be there. Before hanging up, he made sure to tell me not to think I could just show up and go home early either. The drive to work was absolutely hellish. It was only about 2 miles, but I had to pull over once to throw up on the side of the road. I was sweating, cramping, and praying I wouldn't mess myself in my car. Somehow, by sheer willpower and clenching every muscle I had, I made it to the parking lot without any accidents. Walking through the building was torture. I was pale, doubled over with stomach cramps, and probably looked like death warmed over. A couple of co-workers asked if I was okay, but I just nodded and kept walking toward the supervisor's office. When I got there, he was sitting at his desk, not even looking up from his paperwork. He told me I was late without even looking up. I said I got there as fast as I could and really didn't feel good. He just told me to sit down and wait, saying he'd deal with me when he was ready. So there I sat in this uncomfortable plastic chair while my stomach churned and rumbled ominously. The fluorescent lights were making my head pound, and I could feel cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. Every few minutes, my stomach would cramp up so bad I'd have to grip the sides of the chair. He made me sit there for 15 full minutes. 15 minutes of pure agony while he shuffled papers and made phone calls, completely ignoring the fact that I was obviously suffering. I could tell he was enjoying having me there, making me wait while I was sick. Finally, he looked up with this smug expression and asked what this dramatic illness was that I supposedly had. I started to tell him again that I had a stomach bug and had been throwing up, but that's when it hit me. The nausea came in a massive wave, and before I could even think about getting up or asking where the bathroom was, I turned to the side and projectile vomited all over his office. It wasn't a small, polite amount either. It was a massive explosion of watery vomit, mixed with chunks of yogurt and whatever color Gatorade I tried to drink earlier. It splashed across his desk, his paperwork, his coffee mug, and even got on his shirt. The smell filled the room instantly. But that wasn't even the worst part. The stress and strain of throwing up caused me to lose control of my other end too. Not completely, but enough that there was definitely some leakage situation happening. The whole thing was absolutely disgusting and impossible to ignore. He just sat there for a moment, staring at the mess, looking like he was about to be sick himself. His face went from smug to green pretty quickly. He finally looked at me and said I'd made my point and could go home. I somehow managed to stumble out of there and drive home, where I spent the next day and a half basically living in my bathroom. My neighbor, bless her heart, even brought me some baby wipes at some point because she could tell I was really struggling. When I came back to work 2 days later, I found out that the supervisor had to stay late that night to clean up his office himself. Apparently, the cleaning crew took one look at the mess and refused to deal with it. He had to scrub vomit off his desk, throw away a bunch of paperwork, and the smell lingered for days. I deal with chronic pain. It started years ago in college when I began experiencing severe joint pain and muscle weakness that would flare up without warning. After months of doctor visits and tests, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. The worst part is that people can't see it, so they assume I'm perfectly healthy. The condition makes it difficult for me to stand for long periods. Even 5 minutes of standing can trigger pain that shoots through my legs and back. I have an official disability certificate that allows me to use accessible parking and public transport accommodations, but I rarely have to show it since most people are understanding when I explain my situation. I work part-time at a small office downtown, and I rely on public transport to get around since driving during pain flares isn't safe. The bus route I take is usually pretty busy, especially during rush hours, but I've learned to time my trips to avoid the worst crowds. That afternoon, I had just finished a doctor's appointment and was heading home. The appointment had been rough, my doctor was adjusting my medication again, and I was already feeling the beginnings of a flare-up. The bus was more crowded than usual, probably because of some event happening downtown. I managed to get an aisle seat between a high school kid with a massive sports bag and a businessman whose backpack kept bumping into my shoulder. It wasn't comfortable, but at least I was sitting. I was checking my phone when the bus made another stop. A woman in her late 20s stepped on. She was clearly pregnant, though not heavily so, maybe 4 or 5 months along. She wore a nice dress and carried a nice purse. The moment she got on, she scanned the bus with this expectant look. Her eyes landed on me and she walked straight over. No hesitation, no looking around for other options. The pregnant woman walked up to me and demanded that I give her my seat. There was no polite greeting, no please, just a flat command like I was supposed to jump up immediately. I looked up at her, confused by her rude tone, and politely explained that I had a disability that made standing for long periods very difficult. I told her I would prefer to keep my seat if possible. She raised her voice and called my explanation ridiculous. She said I looked perfectly fine and that she was pregnant and needed to sit down. Her voice was getting louder and other passengers started looking our way. I told her that I understood pregnancy was uncomfortable, but explained that I had fibromyalgia which caused severe pain when I stood too long. I even offered to show her my disability documentation if she needed proof. Before I could reach for my purse, she cut me off and accused me of being rude and selfish. She demanded to know if I wanted her to fall and hurt her baby, making it sound like I was personally threatening her well-being. Now people were staring. The high school kid next to me shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I felt my face getting hot with embarrassment. I told her that I would never want anyone to get hurt, but that I wasn't faking my disability. I explained that standing for the entire rest of this trip would put me in serious pain. She shouted back that I was young and healthy looking, told me to stop making excuses, and demanded I give up the seat. She called the whole situation unbelievable, her voice carrying across the entire bus. An older woman across the aisle had been watching the whole exchange. She stood up and offered her seat to the pregnant woman, saying there was no need for all the commotion. The pregnant woman huffed but moved to take the offered seat. When she sat down, she continued looking at me angrily and made loud comments about how some people had no consideration for others. The older woman who gave up her seat caught my eye and gave me a small, understanding smile. I silently mouthed my thanks to her, feeling grateful that at least someone recognized the situation for what it was. For the rest of the 20-minute ride, I could feel eyes on me. The pregnant woman kept shooting dirty looks my way and making loud comments to no one about how selfish some people could be. A few passengers seemed to be whispering about the situation. I tried to focus on my phone, but the anxiety was making my symptoms worse. When my stop came, I carefully stood up, moving slowly because my joints had stiffened during the ride. When I made my way to the front of the bus, the pregnant woman's voice rang out behind me. She announced loudly that I could walk just fine and declared that she knew I had been faking the whole time. Her voice was meant for everyone on the bus to hear. Several passengers turned to look at me again. I felt like everyone was judging me, thinking I was some kind of fraud. I wanted to turn around and explain that walking slowly doesn't mean I'm not in pain, that invisible disabilities are real, but I knew it would just cause more of a scene. I got off the bus and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. My hands were shaking and I could feel the stress triggering more pain in my back and shoulders. The worst part wasn't even the confrontation itself, it was the assumption that because I'm young and don't use mobility aids, I must be lying about my condition. I've dealt with this kind of doubt from some family members and even a few doctors, but having it happen so publicly was humiliating. When I walked the 2 blocks to my apartment, each step sent jolts of pain through my legs. I thought about how differently things might have gone if she had just asked politely. I've given up my seat before when I was having a good day, and I would have been happy to explain my situation if she had approached me with basic courtesy. But instead she chose to assume, demand, and then publicly shame me when I didn't immediately comply with her wishes. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.